Hello? Hey. Hi, everybody. I'm Zach. I draw comics. I first wanted to congratulate Lloyd James on his tremendous victory, and I don't remember what the office was, but something or other. I hope it doesn't go to your head. He was saying something about the Sudetenland. I didn't catch all of it, but it was uncomfortable. Thanks to those of you who got that joke. I'm sorry. So this is our fourth year here, and a really cool thing happened this year, which is we sold out way early. So Lloyd actually built a graph of historical velocity of ticket sales, and this was our best year yet, which saved me a big heart attack. So thank you for that. In the fourth year of things, you often feel like you need to spice things up a little bit. So we made one change, which is that it's a little perverse. The keynote will be by a social scientist this year. I'm sorry. So anyway, let me tell you about what's at stake tonight. Tonight, is this mic? Can you hear me? Maybe? Okay. Really? I can't tell it's on. All right, this is awkward to do this in front of 700 people. So we have a trophy here of Hennig Brand. We used to do a trophy that was Darwin looking confused. And the idea was the original show was just about evolution. You were only allowed to do evolutionary theories, and we expanded it a couple years ago to allow any kind of scientist. But the problem is, or any kind of science, the problem is you need someone who really represents all possible science in the BAHFest spirit. So we picked this guy, Hennig Brand, who was an alchemist in the 17th century, and his claim to fame is he discovered phosphorus. And the way he discovered it was by boiling urine. And I used to say he boiled his own urine. I actually looked into it. He boiled everybody's urine. He collected and boiled it. And what I love about it is he apparently was doing everything wrong in his protocol. Like, so one, he's an alchemist, so he's looking for gold. You can connect the dots on that. But he also had a step in his protocol where he eliminated most of the phosphorus. So what's really cool is he was like, thinking he would discover gold, which he didn't, and he removed most of the cool thing he found, which was phosphorus, and he was boiling everyone's pee all day long. And he still discovered an element, which probably no one here will do. So that is the spirit I want to have tonight. I usually have an intro speech, but I couldn't think of anything good, but I've been working on a book that involves some foundations of logic and computer science stuff. So I came across two stories that maybe you haven't heard that I thought would be funny. Does anyone know the story about the time Alan Turing took up riflery? Maybe a couple people? Well, pretend it's new to you. So there's this story that Alan Turing was at Bletchley. It was early days of the war, and he heard you could go take riflery lessons at the Home Guard office. And so he thought, well, I'd like to learn to shoot in case there's an invasion. So he goes, and being Alan Turing, they give him the paperwork, he fills it out, and he signs up, and he goes, and he starts learning to shoot a rifle and going on parade and doing all that stuff. And he's just a really smart guy. He very quickly becomes a crack shot, and he decides, being Alan Turing, that he's done. He's not going to show up to any more Home Guard meetups because, after all, he's already mastered the skill, so there's no point in keeping on going. So a couple weeks go by, and he gets a call from the local colonel who's really angry because he has not shown up to parade each week. And he calls him in and says, Turing, why have you not come in to your lessons? And Turing says, well, I learned it. I don't need to come anymore. And the colonel says, that's not how it works. This is the army. You do what we say. You are liable to military law. And Turing says, no, I'm not. And the guy says, yes, you are. And he says, no, I'm not. And so what ends up happening is the colonel pulls out the piece of paper that he signed to get in. And there's a field, and the field says, do you agree you are liable to military law in Britain? And he wrote, no. And my favorite part about that is apparently, it's hard to interpret why someone does something, but my understanding is he did it just because he looked at it and he was like, well, there's no upside to saying yes. And he's apparently right. They let him in when he said no. So, and I had one other story I came across that you probably haven't heard. I've only found it one place, and it was written by a guy named Martin Davis in a book for the centennial of Turing's birthday, and it was about the great mathematician David Hilbert, whose name I'm mispronouncing, but whatever. So if you don't know David Hilbert, he's one of the most important mathematicians of all time, and he did a lot of his famous work at Göttingen. And the story goes that he was a very esteemed professor. This would have been in the early 20th century, and he was walking around, and his trousers were just like shredded at the bottom. And the assumption was he was just such an absent-minded professor. He didn't know. He was just walking around with these horrible trousers, and no one had the nerve to tell him. And so like the whole university is embarrassed because they have this famous guy and he's walking around with his pants ruined, and no one wants to confront him about it. So it falls to his assistant, Richard Courant, who was later a great mathematician himself, but they say, Courant, you've got to figure out a way to tell Hilbert to change his pants. And this is all true, by the way. This is apparently a thing that actually happened. And so Courant also can't confront him. He's David Hilbert. You can't just confront him about his pants. So what he says, he knows Hilbert likes taking nature walks. So he says, Dr. Hilbert, come with me. We'll go on a nature walk. And he steers them. Hilbert's just going on and on about whatever math he's into right now. He steers Hilbert into some brambles. And then they get through the brambles, and Courant turns to Hilbert and says, oh no, it appears your trousers have been ripped. And Hilbert turns to him and says, in a whisper, oh no, I've been doing this for weeks and no one has noticed. So, yeah, that's all I got. A wonderful book, by the way. Martin Davis writes wonderful math books. But anyway, so thank you for coming, and I want to do a special thanks this year to my wife, Dr. Wienersmith. It's okay to laugh. She took over a lot of the organization this year, and most of y'all don't look under the hood, of course, but it's been quite a bit more organized this year. And but she had to stay home because we have babies who like to eat regularly. You can't front load with babies; it doesn't work. And so thank you, Kelly, and thank you everyone for coming out to our little nerd party. And now I will give you to the capable hands of Matt Parker, who wrote a novel you should all buy, right? Should they? Yes. Yes?
Thank you. Whoa, so, I mean, Zach was very humble by saying he draws cartoons. So, of course, he does the Saturday morning breakfast cereal series online, which I can guarantee everyone here, almost with a statistically insignificant number of you will not have seen something he has done. But sadly, his cartoons are not a wry look at modern life through the eyes of aliens trying to be humans. So, it's a bit 2017, to be honest. I hadn't heard that Turing story before. Before Zach's like, have you heard this? I'm like, I haven't heard that story. That's absolutely amazing and totally on brand for Turing. The next question was, ironically, are you a robot? Yes, no. There you are. So the way this is going to work is I chat to you for a while to make sure you're all adequately happy. I bring on a keynote speaker. They talk to you for a while. Then we have some guests to bring on, and we have a competition because it is the Bad Ad Hoc Hypothesis Fest here in London. So we'll have some legitimate scientists or people who are sufficiently sciencey trying to convince you of some entirely plausible and, we're assured, entirely correct theory. And then we will decide who is the most correct and or plausible. So we will work our way through that as we go along. I'm your host, so I'll be bringing people on and off as we go, making sure you're all happy and everything is under control. This is the third time I'm hosting this, which is an absolute pleasure. It's really good fun. If you've not come across me before, my name is Matt Parker. I work doing mathematics communication. So my job is to convince more people to be more excited about maths, which I do legitimate media, TV, radio, which no one pays any attention to. somewhere. And what was originally a 3-meter deep freshwater lake ended up being a 400-meter deep saltwater lake, right? All because someone got a triangle off by 120 meters. And so that is story 1. We'll call that oil mining story, just for future reference, although there are only 2 stories. The second story of miscalculation gone wrong is the Air Canada Flight 143, which was taking off from Montreal on the 23rd of July, 1983. It was a Boeing 767, which is way more on topical than I appreciate at the moment. And it was not the plane's fault, right? The plane was fine. The plane was there. It was being fueled. They calculate the fuel for aircraft in mass, right? Because volume changes depending on the temperature. Mass is a bit more reliable. And they worked out they needed 22,300 kilograms of fuel. And so all the crew carefully worked out the number of kilograms required and then fueled it in pounds. Now, a pound is just less than half a kilogram. So this plane was fueled with about half the fuel it actually required. And there's a whole separate story on why the sensors weren't working, why effectively the fuel gauge wasn't functional, and the pilot was happy with that. Incredible series of events that happened on the other side, but they genuinely took off flying from Montreal to Edmonton with half the fuel required. And just incredibly, though, they had to make a stopover in Ottawa. So halfway through the flight, they had to land again where the fuel will be rechecked and the plane actually fueled. Like phenomenal luck. So they landed in Ottawa where they made the same unit mistake. North Americans, eh? Took off again without any additional fuel, ran out mid-flight. Unbelievably, the pilot used to be a glider pilot, and just, despite the lack of instruments or control, somehow managed to get 40 miles gliding a Boeing 767 to a disused runway in a town called Gimli, managed to land it. It was a 7,200-foot runway, landed within the first 80 feet of the runway with no major controls. Absolutely phenomenal. The landing gear broke and the nose hit the runway, which was actually a convenient source of friction, and they were able to stop before the far end, much to the relief of the people camping there for a racing weekend. Now, here's the thing about a 767 when the engines are turned off. It's pretty quiet. So they had no idea until they heard bam, and they all look up, and there's just a jet sliding. Bonus fact, I discovered after I wrote the book, the people they sent out to evaluate and repair the plane in their van, they ran out of fuel on the way there. So on brand it hurts. We'll call that it's called the Gimli Glider is now the name of that aircraft, right? So we'll call that the plane fuel story, and we've got the mining triangulation story. Just no, don't cheer for this. Hands up. Who had heard the mining oil? This is literally just market research now. Okay, 5 to 10%, so controlling for Imperial about 1% of the population. Okay. And who'd heard the Gimli glider fuel before? Okay, that's, okay, like 1 in 6. Okay, excellent. It's just, literally, I'm just doing some research. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to say the 2 stories in that order. You're going to cheer. And some of you will have noticed the flaw in this, that if you're twice as far away from the stage as someone else, your vote counts for 1/4 as much. I'm sorry, it's just the square nature. Okay, anyway, here we go. So, first of all, we need to quiet, I calibrate. So the first story is going to be triangulation oil. I'll do that, and you cheer if that was your favorite. Let me just reset this. There we go. Yeah! 97 decibel. Okay, here we go. Ready? And the next one is the fuel plane one. Here we go. After a certain point, it's just sarcastic, all right? That's 104. Okay, there we are. So we have a victor. So later on, at the very end of the night, once you've seen all the contestants, you will have an opportunity to applaud and to have your voice literally heard and analyzed on a log scale. So I'm now going to bring on our keynote speaker for this evening. Your applause will not be measured after the end of this. Don't panic. I've worked with your speaker several times over several years. Goodness. So you may know them from their fantastic work on the BBC. So they do More or Less on Radio 4, and of which 4 fans are in. There you go. They also have a series on the radio, as well as a book about 50 things which made the modern economy. And they are an economist by trade. So they're various books from Messy to Undercover Economist. And people often can, like, because I do maths, everyone's like, oh, you must love economics. It's got numbers in it. I'm like, no. Very different numbers. It's like, my dad's an accountant. Everyone's like, oh, well, that's where you got your love of maths. I'm like, no, that's where I got my love of adding up carefully. But I do have a great passion for economics, so can you please welcome to the stage your keynote speaker, Tim Harford.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. So I've been thinking about John Maynard Keynes recently, great economist, invented the word macroeconomics, a beautiful prose stylist, a brilliant investor. He died a millionaire, a great statesman, had the ear of heads of state on both sides of the Atlantic, and prolific, absolutely prolific in bed. I mean, the man, just a sex machine. The number of notches on the bedpost that man managed to rack up, and both sides of the bed, if you know what I mean. It would make people go weak at the knees. There was a Canadian diplomat called Douglas LePan. I don't know if they ever, I don't know, but he saw Keynes speak and he wrote, "I am spellbound. This is the most beautiful creature I have ever listened to. Is he a human or from some other realm? There is something mythic and fabulous about him." And I really have found that my own experience is very similar as an economist. At first, I thought that the effect that I was having on people was just like a raw animal kind of physical attraction. But then I realized, no, it's not just that. It's also economics. It's the economics. When people find out that I'm an economist, they're just overwhelmed with awe, love, enormous respect. And that's got me thinking, and that's what I want to talk to you about this evening. Why do people respect and love economists so much? What is it? I mean, is it the brains? Is it that we're so smart? Could be that, but we're only a little bit smarter than the mathematicians, so I don't know. Is it the culture? We're so sophisticated? Yeah, I mean, the poets are sophisticated, and I don't think it's that. Maybe it's because we're very practical people. The chemists are practical, nobody likes them. So, I don't know. And then I realized it is because people have realized that economists have mastered the most powerful force in the universe. I'm not talking about the Infinity Gauntlet, although when you think about it, Thanos is obviously an economist. Yeah? I mean, an economist with a gym membership, but he's an economist. But no, it's not that. It's a more general force. It's still a yet more powerful force. The force that I am speaking of is the power of incentives. Oh. I can see that I have to give you an example. So, about 100 years ago, the French authorities in Hanoi, the colonial power, decided too many rats. They wanted to do something about the rats. And so they decided to offer an incentive. You know, kill rats, you get cash. And how are you going to prove you've killed rats? Well, just bring us the rat's tail, and you get the cash payment. Yeah, simple incentives. And that seemed to be working pretty well for a while. And then the French noticed a lot of rats without tails just kind of wandering around. Which, of course, makes sense. That is what they had incentivized. Because if you've got a breeding pair of rats and you kill them, you're only going to get 2 tails. But if you cut their tails off, keep them alive, you can have as many tails as you like. So incentives, tremendously powerful. Now, you may, at this point, say, well, but the incentives backfired. The incentives went completely wrong. But when you think about it, that's true of any powerful weapon. I mean, whether we are talking about lip glitter or the H-bomb, if you stick it in the wrong place, it's not going to do the job, right? Aim carefully is all I'm saying, and it's the same thing is true for incentives. Now, you might, of course, be a psychologist. And if you're a psychologist, you might, in your annoying psychologist voice, go, something about some paper, that some finding that incentives don't motivate people. I've got news for you, psychologists. Replicability Thanos clicked his fingers and half of your results disappeared. And what is more, we were able to predict which of the results were going to evaporate and which were not. Do you know how we did it? Incentives. We ran a betting market so you could get cash if you predicted which psychological results were bullshit and which ones were going to stand up. And it was very, very highly correlated with the ones that turned out not to replicate. So the power of incentives yet again. Now, of course, you might say, well, there's more to life than money, Tim. There's, you know, you're just talking about finance here. It's so narrow-minded. And I would agree, because people respond to all kinds of incentives, not just financial incentives. And let me give you an example of that. So a few years ago, there was this big kind of moral panic in the US about the teenage oral sex epidemic. So this is true. So people are very worried. Apparently all the teenagers are going around having oral sex with all the other teenagers. And this was thought to be a bad thing. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, none of my business, okay? But a lot of people were worried about this. And so I did what I do, which was to check the data, looked at the data. The Centers for Disease Control have got data on sexual behavior, and I had a look. And the funny thing was, it said that actually teenagers were having less sex and were losing their virginities at a later age. So that seems contradictory. And then I realized, no. What is going on here is regular sex has become riskier. You've got more knowledge about HIV. You've got the spread of drug-resistant gonorrhea. You've got a systematic attempt to suppress the reproductive rights of women in the United States. All got very serious there for a second. All of these things make regular sex a riskier endeavor. And so, I mean, it's like the price of Coke goes up, you switch to drinking Pepsi, right? The risk of regular sex goes up, you switch to oral sex. You know, it's just perfectly normal substitution. I realized I did just say that Coke was regular sex, Pepsi was oral sex. The Pepsi generation, yes. So yeah, people respond to incentives. And by now, I'm sure you are in agreement with me that this force that we economists uniquely understand, this force is incredibly powerful. But you're probably wondering just how powerful, just what can incentives achieve? Well, you may be familiar with a phrase from Gone with the Wind, Margaret Mitchell's classic novel. Death, taxes, and childbirth. There's never a convenient time for any of them. Well, is that true? Turns out the Australian government implemented a policy a few years back which allowed us to test the hypothesis. So they announced in May 2004 that any baby born on or after the 1st of July 2004 would earn the mother a cash bonus, like a tax incentive, 3,000 Australian dollars. This is about 6 weeks' notice. You've got to admit that sounds like an incentive, to hang on. And a few people did say, are you sure that this policy is wise? But the Australian health minister said, look, no woman is going to risk the health of her baby. No Australian woman is going to risk the health of her baby for a mere 3,000 Australian dollars. So a funny thing happened to the birth rate in Australia in late June 2004. It just started to fall and fall and fall. And then, midnight, all the babies start to appear. And it's literally, the birth rate doubled. There were more than twice as many babies born on the 1st of July as had been the last day of June. It's a very, very popular birthday in Australia. So incentives, they're so powerful that they can even influence the moment that a new life first takes breath. But could they be even more powerful than that? I wonder. Margaret Mitchell's famous line was riffing off an even more famous line penned by Benjamin Franklin. Nothing in life is certain but death and taxes. Well, a lot of people don't know the context in which he wrote that line. He was 83 years old, he was sick, he's a few months away from his own death. And he's reflecting on his own mortality in a letter to a friend. And he pens this line about the inevitability of his own death. Nothing in life is certain but death and taxes. Obviously completely wrong about the taxes. People dodge taxes all the time. But what about death? Well, the Australian government this is going to sound familiar. So, early in 1979, they announced that on the 1st of July, 1979, inheritance tax would be abolished. So a funny thing happened to the death rate in Australia in late June. The death rate started to fall. The flow of bodies from the nursing home to the mortuary was drying up. And then, midnight, 1st of July, they all start showing up. So a couple of economists looked at this and they concluded that half of the people in Australia who could have skipped out on inheritance tax by dying 2 weeks later did. So not only do incentives determine when we are born, they determine when we die as well. It's just an astonishingly powerful force. And we economists, we alone, understand and have mastered this force. And I think that perhaps accounts for our unbelievable popularity and the very high regard in which we are universally held. That is my hypothesis. But I felt there was one further demonstration I could give you of the power of incentives. So I have here signed copies of my books. I'll be signing more later. Signed copies of my books, 50 Things That Made the Modern Economy, and Messy. And my plan was to give a signed copy to whoever stopped clapping last. At the end of this... No, not started clapping. Pace yourself, okay? Pace yourself. But, so Zach he was like, well, Tim, we have to be out of the theatre by midnight, and so Zach said no. Zach gave me, he redesigned the rules of this. So he's given me these rules. Firstborn child. Case of dispute. Courts of Delaware. Yeah, okay, now here we are. All right, so what Zach suggested, you can blame him for this. Zach suggested that I should give the book to whoever is the penultimate person to stop clapping. But also that if anyone is still clapping after 45 seconds, no one gets the book. Unless, of course, you buy the book later, there will be signing the books. So 45, do we have it, Matt, do we have a stopwatch or something? Matt? Yeah. On the phone, right, with the decibel meter? Yeah, of course. Okay, so, right, okay. So the stakes are high. So are you nearly ready, Matt? Let me know, you're ready?
45 seconds from the start of applause.
But yeah, 45 seconds from, I will cue the rapturous applause.
Boom.
Yeah, and then, and I know you would just naturally all just keep going all night, but so the penultimate person to stop clapping gets the book, but no one gets a book if people are still clapping after 45 seconds, right?
Okay.
Okay. Sorry?
Nobody clapped.
Nobody clapped.
Sorry, yes.
Great, thank you very much.
We're off! Go, we're going.
Yeah.
Tim Harford, everyone! Tim Harford!
How many time? For the form? That's 30 seconds.
They're not gonna.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. No one gets a book. No one gets a book. Thank you very much.
Some of you had the most "I'm ruining this for everyone" facial expression. A final genuine round of applause for Tim Harford. Come on. You'll be around signing books afterwards? I will. You will be, so if you want to come and get books, in fact, a lot of the people you see on stage will have books around, so they'll be sold afterwards. We'll be signing them. I don't know if I mentioned I've got a book that's just come out, so I will be around to deface that, as will several other people who are involved in this evening. Speaking of which, I'm now going to bring on the judges. So I'll bring on our 4 judges, and then I'll explain the rules before we go racing into it. So don't panic. But I thought I better get the judges up here so we can make sure they're paying attention to the rules. So the first judge, I believe, was our winner from last year. So wait for the applause. Did you learn nothing? So I know. Dan Shaw is our first judge who... walk up. Come on, do it. Dan Shaw! Oh, wow, bottom of his tongue. Take a seat. So, Dan is a mathematician from the civil service, or so it says here, studying maths and astrophysics part-time with the Open University, and his hobbies include reading, astronomy, and figuring out the most cost-effective method of removing planetary bodies he doesn't like. And we were chatting before, because you were worried that you were dangerously underqualified. Now, you've got a microphone there if you wish to interact back. It's entirely optional. And this is actually a test for the mics to make sure they're all working. Are you on, Dan?
Hear me at the back? Yeah.
Here we are. Okay. So it's fine. Like, you're studying. You won last time. I think you're the only winner on the judge panel, right? The only person with actual experience. And we've brought you on first, so there's no context for the standard yet. Okay, so...
The bar is set low.
What was that?
The bar is set low.
The bar is set very low. So we just had Tim's fantastic routine about how popular economists are. His hilarious comedy routine. about how popular economists are. So, next judge up onto the stage is Mark Miodownik, who is the UCL Professor of Materials and Society, separately, I assume. He got his PhD in turbine jet engine alloys. I didn't know that. Well done. I'm learning as obviously I memorized this in advance. And so for more than 15 years, he's championed material science research and its links to the arts and humanities, medicine, society, and he set up the Institute of Making at UCL. Can you please put your hands together for Mark Miodownik? Good. Yeah. Not the first time I've had to welcome Mark to the stage. So you did the Christmas lectures. When was it?
A long time ago, when I had hair.
I know. Years ago, Mark did the Royal Institution Christmas lectures, and I do the warm-up for the Royal Institution Christmas lectures, because I am living the goddamn dream. And so I had to warm up like young people and get them in, and then whenever anything went wrong, I had to run out and cover. But they were fun. I really enjoyed those lectures.
We had the highlight for me was I'd always wanted to have a flea circus. And we put on a flea circus, and people misunderstood what we meant by a flea circus, and they left the auditorium. And we said, no, it's not you flee. It's these little... It was partly, I think partly you gave them the wrong idea.
Flea is a homonym. Mark Miodownik. Our next judge, Elise Andrew, is the managing editor and founder of I Fucking Love Science. I don't know why I get more Australian when I say that. The website began as a hobby when they were at university. I believe here was it Imperial. Sheffield. Wow. I was about to say there's one other person here from Sheffield, but there's one other brave person here from Sheffield. And so now it started as a hobby. It reaches hundreds of millions of people every year, and they were awarded the Samford Ruffles Award for Science Communication, and Forbes named her as one of their 30 to watch under 30. Can you welcome to the stage Elise Andrew? We'll also engage in some hilarious off-the-cuff banter to make sure the microphones, everything's working. Sheffield University?
Yeah, Sheffield.
And what did you study?
Biology, animal and plant sciences.
Wow, and you finished the degree and then just went...
Well, I started the site while I was in the middle of my third year. Well, I was kind of procrastinating. I should have been doing my dissertation, and instead I started a website and accidentally became famous. It was a whole thing.
But that was a better career choice than the degree.
I didn't see it that way at the time. I more saw it as a bit annoying, actually.
Oh, really? Oh, this success.
It all just sort of happened. It was very much one of those out-of-body experiences where, like, things happen to you and you just kind of don't really realise it. I was just posting weird stuff on Facebook, and then all of a sudden there's 20 million people following me and people to invite me to places like this and care about my opinions on things. It's all very surreal.
Elise Andrew!
Just got lower.
And our final judge, Michele Dougherty, is the local act. I shouldn't say local act before Professor of Space Physics and head of the physics department at Imperial College, London. She is leading the unmanned exploratory missions to Saturn and Jupiter. She's the principal investigator on the magnetometer, which is on Cassini and off and working over at Saturn, and the magnetometer, which will be on JUICE. Oh my goodness. The Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer. JUICE. That is the worst name. Which will launch in June 2020. She is also a fellow of the Royal Society and was awarded the Royal Astronomical Society Geophysics Gold Medal in 2017. Can you please welcome to the stage Michele Dougherty? Wow. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Some people are applauding like their grades depend on it.
No, I paid them beforehand.
Well done. Well done. You've incentivized them is the way we say it
Absolutely.
to make it sound less illegal. So Juice should be launching in 2022.
Absolutely, and it is the worst name ever.
Excellent. Right, and what other instruments have they got on it, on that spacecraft? Is it
11.
11?
But mine is the most important one.
Well, magnetic fields are the top.
Absolutely.
Top
Can't
priority.
do anything without them.
Excellent. I'm hugely biased because my wife researches magnetic fields. Michele Dougherty. All right, now we're going to get down to some rules. So this is how the game is going to work. We have 6 speakers. They're going to come up and they're going to present to us their bad ad hoc hypothesis. And they will have a number of minutes each, which I believe is 5. They can do what they want. You are the worst event organizer ever, Zach. I don't know. Take your time. They'll be doing as long as they want. And so I will deduct points at some point. And so we've got 6 speakers who will come up. They will present what they want to do. When they finish speaking, now just whenevs, the judges can ask them any questions they would like. So there won't be a question from every judge every time. Sometimes there may be loads of questions. Sometimes there may be far fewer. It's whatever you wish to ask and inquire, and they will attempt to alleviate your fears or amplify them, depending on the theory, I guess. So after a while, we'll chat for a bit, and then once all 6 speakers are done, the judges will get to rate their top 3 favorites. So, and they'll be in a ranked order: favorite, second favorite, third favorite. We then assign points in a very linear fashion. If a speaker gets a top rating from any judge, they get 3 points. They get 2 for any second ratings, the only position that equals its number of points. And they will get 1 point for being, I should plan what I'm going to say in advance. They will, not just whatever's happening here, they will get 1 point if they're in a third position. We will then do the clap rating from the audience, who will get the same number of points. The winner gets 3 points. There's no second or third in that. There's the top winner gets 3 points, which actually can shift things a reasonable amount. The most points, we never reveal the points, by the way, because that's bordering on bullying. We just announce the winner, right? And the winner gets a fantastic range of prizes, which I will mention at the very end before we announce the winner, because I'm going to have a lot of time to fill at that point. But I will mention that Penguin, the publishers, have very kindly provided books from their particular imprint, which I'm mentioning because they publish my books. Okay. And there's a bonus. I mentioned the bonus prize. We've obviously got brand boiling urine now of unknown origin, but there's also this fantastic award. This is the Lloyd James Award. What's the official wording for this award? Best use of graphs, charts, and all figures, and all figures. Not exclusive or, just all figures. And that will be, you just choose. You just, the judges choose. Oh, okay, wow. Thanks a lot. They all know more than I do. Okay. The judges will choose. I have recently decided. Okay. So I think that's all the rules. Everyone's clear on what they're doing over here. I will start a timer anyway for the various contestants, just to make sure I know approximately how long they have spoken for. And I've been given descriptions of all the people who will be in the competition. And to make it perfectly fair, I have read none of them in advance, and I will get everybody's name slightly wrong. Okay, so what I will do, is everyone poised here already? Okay, what I'll do, I'll say your name at the beginning. At that point, if you want to come up and get ready to go, that's absolutely fine. I'll read the description. I'll say your name again. You burst into it. We can't go wrong. Okay, here we go. So your first description is incredibly long. Oh my goodness, you've got to you're like, write as much or as little as you want. Okay. It's not like our booking here is only a finite amount of time. Okay, so your first contestant is Jack McMinn. Jack McMinn, who is a... No, don't. At the end. Oh my God, you've got to incentivize people, don't you? They just go wild. He's a 22-year-old post-grad student studying zoology at the University of Cambridge, specifically molar morphometry of African mammals. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, you know, it's well funded.
It's well funded. Please hold your jokes until you're being judged, Jack. He's a member of the Cambridge Impronauts. Well, that's pretty obvious now. And enjoys watching nature documentaries and playing piano divided by sax. Sorry, piano/sax.
They didn't say...
Got it. Put your hands together for Jack McMinn.
Thank you. Okay, so as the nice man over there said, I'm Jack McMinn, and this is my talk, The Importance of Localized Acinonox Beta Ignition to African Ecology and Predator-Prey Dynamics. That's very straightforward, I know, so let's just jump straight into it. Okay, so the mixture of forest and grassland that you see on the African savanna is largely maintained by bushfires, and experts say that these are generally started by lightning strikes or increased human activity. But given the nature of the BAHFest, I'm here to propose a new hypothesis, as we can see from this simulation or perhaps chart, graph, or figure. So as we can see here, my hypothesis is that bushfires are caused by cheetahs running into trees and exploding in a horrific cheetah-sidal ball of flame. So my first question when constructing this hypothesis is it possible? And if we compare the kinetic energies of a sprinting cheetah to the minimum ignition energy of wood, we can see that statistically speaking, it's a probabilistic given that if a cheetah runs into a tree, it's going to explode. And I don't think we need to ask any further questions about that. My next question was, how often must this happen for cheetahs exploding into trees to be the sole cause of bushfires in the African savanna? So to do this, I put on my thinking cap and I calculated the area of the African savanna that be made up of tree. So if the cheetahs were moving randomly, where would they intersect? Integrated the number of bushfires, number of cheetahs, and I ultimately arrived at the figure that if African cheetahs steering into trees is the sole cause of bushfires, that every single cheetah will need to run about twice a minute for 24 hours of every single day. So a cheetah's daily output of randomly running at top speed throughout the African savanna would look something like this. Only 383 times more. Now, naturally, I'm going to be the first to admit this is very unlikely, but I think that this is due to an issue with our model, that the cheetahs are moving randomly. What if someone or something is steering them into the trees on purpose? Ladies, gentlemen, and other... So why would an innocent gazelle want to steer cheetahs into trees? Well, first of all, there's the whole predator-prey thing. Just as, there's coevolution between top speed and weaponry, just that there may be coevolution between not wanting to run into a tree and exploding and wanting your predator to run into a tree and explode. It makes sense. The second aspect of it is more based on forestry. So the cheetahs exploding against the trees clears more room for grazing, means there's less room for predators to sneak up on you. Generally, it's a good idea for gazelles to steer cheetahs into trees. So what direct evidence do we have that this happens? Well, we've got another simulation /graph/figure, yeah, that thing. The Thompson's gazelle is 89% of a cheetah's diet, and they exhibit this behavior called stotting, where they jump straight up and down on the spot, much like this. And this is generally considered by experts to be an honest signal of fitness. So it's literally a gazelle saying to a cheetah, don't hunt me, I'm really strong, I can do this all day. But as we can see from the simulation, look at... Oh, the humanity. The second piece of evidence that I have is during the Pleistocene, when there was, these ice ages and there was this expansion of the savanna habitat as a result, we see this genetic bottleneck in cheetah populations that no doubt represents a population decrease as a result of gazelles evolving this cheetah-steering behavior. So as it will follow along here, ice ages cause savanna, and oh no, look at... They're all dead. Now, let's talk about conservation, because cheetahs are listed as a vulnerable species, so we need to combat cheetah steering in some way. My first proposition is some large-scale engineering initiatives in the African savanna to ensure that when cheetahs run into trees, they don't die. So perhaps a large cat flap. Or investing in holograms and making large hologrammatic trees. The upshot of which is that nothing happens. Obviously, though, I'm aware that this is very expensive, so it might be easier just to knock down all of the trees in the African savanna. Now, I know this is a controversial opinion, given insects, reptiles, all these other types of animals rely on the trees, but environmentalism is really based about compromise these days. And I think that you and I will all agree that cheetahs are far cuter than any tree I've ever seen. So, in short, save the cheetah, destroy all the trees in Africa. Thank you.
Any questions?
So, you posit that chopping down all the trees would be the best solution to the problem. Why have you gone for that option rather than the possibly simpler one of just simply shooting all the gazelles?
Well, great question. But also the issue is that if we head back, the issue is that gazelles are kind of cute too. I mean, if you're telling me you can take a gun and put it to this animal's face, then, be my guest. We're all judging you here. I mean, you're judging, and it doesn't matter.
The word cheetah, it has a double meaning, doesn't it? Is that in any way related to this phenomenon?
The fact that they're cheating,
You said it.
I did. I said it because it's the name of the name of the animal. Potentially, I don't know the etymology of the word cheetah, but if there's anything involved cheating in terms of running into trees, are they cheating in a way? Are we cheating? Who's the cheetah here? Maybe we're the cheetah guys. Let's think about that.
So obviously this is a very complex predator-prey dynamic that's going on here. Do you think that ethically we have the right to chop down all the trees, to involve ourselves in that?
I don't think that stopped us before.
I'm afraid you walked straight into that one.
I very much did.
So, some of the questions I was thinking about have been asked already, but have you asked the gazelles what they think?
Well, I have done. Unfortunately, the language barrier is really it's really holding back, especially because, as you can see here from my nice little thing, the gazelles are actually megalomaniacs. So really, I'm not sure if I want to speak to the gazelles. I'm just happy to let them be, while also...
Failure investigation. We are going to talk afterwards. In addition to his public transport work, his previous research spanned experimental use of CubeSat, satellites, recycling composites, carbon fiber crash structures, and he's also a volunteer at the South London Makerspace. Can you please put your hands together for Ed Bilson?
Thank you. Thank you, and just to clear up a slight error at the beginning, I don't have any scientific credentials. So, judges, presenters, esteemed guests, I'm here today to discuss a 21st century problem with a 19th century solution. The benefits of public transport are very well established. It reduces pollution, it shapes cities, and it improves access to education and jobs. It also entertains small children and gives transport engineers something to talk about at parties. However, it faces two serious problems. Take London. Despite the best public transport network in the world, capacity is only just keeping ahead of demand. This shortfall results in difficulty commuting, service delays, and exacerbates our second major issue, a serious decline in public toilet provision. Now, transport and sanitation have always gone hand in hand. You've got Roman roads and public toilets, Victorian railways and Bazalgette sewers, and of course British the Rail and this cat Tiddles, who lived in the public toilets at Paddington Station. Unfortunately, Tiddles died in 1983, and it's all been downhill since then, with poor hygiene scores at even the best public toilet and a general decline in numbers. There's only one solution. We need a rapid, high-frequency commuter service which delivers a new generation of public toilets. We need to fire commuters through the sewers on a torrent of high-pressure sewage. It is difficult to see why this idea hasn't been implemented before. This is an underground railway tunnel. Note the similarity of shape with this, the Fleet Storm Relief Sewer. And this sewer runs directly from major commuter stations around King's Cross to London's financial hub in the city. Our proposal includes new, high-quality public toilets at King's Cross, combined with a transport hub in the existing sewer. Passengers can board spacious, comfortable, and most importantly, airtight pods, which will then travel down the sewer at 50 miles an hour. A departure every 3/4 of a second, a journey time of 2 minutes, 128,000 commuters every morning powered by the natural hydraulic pressure of sewage. Now, I know what you're thinking. Can it be done? By which, naturally, you mean, is there enough sewage? Well, asking each passenger to spend a penny delivers about 1% of our requirement. We can make use of other local sources, such as the 5 million kilos a day which goes into the Thames, but it's clear we need to think bigger. The area inside the M25 delivers 186,000 tonnes, and by adding in southeast England, Essex, Sussex and Norfolk, we actually exceed demand by 3% for a total of 416,000 tonnes per hour. That's 118 swimming pools a day. So, yes, there's just enough sewage. And imagine the uplift in public mood if a fifth of the nation knew they were helping us commute just by sitting on the toilet. The hydraulic pressure will come from a tower at King's Cross. This is quite a simple calculation because we can neglect friction between the pods and the sewer wall thanks to London's endemic fatberg problem. We only need 143 metres of head for this to work, and as King's Cross is currently being redeveloped, one more tower probably won't excite comment. Now, 140 metres sounds like a lot, but in London it's quite modest, just a bit taller than the London Eye. Not including the 300 million litre sewer tank on the top. Naturally, it's not as simple as all that. There are certainly engineering challenges we'll need to overcome. The return journey in the evenings will require a second tower in the city, which we'll need to build or rent. We need somewhere to store 15,000 transport pods. And focus groups have noted concerns about the smell. But I invite you to contemplate what might be achieved. 265 meters gets us 3 hours of operation. 950 meters gets us the tallest building in the world by quite some margin, and round-the-clock service. That is a public transport system we can be proud of. Thank you for your attention. And I'll be happy to give grovelling, obsequious answers to any questions the panel has.
Okay, yes, I have questions.
Oh, no.
Two, in fact. So my first question is how are the stations going to work if your frequency is going to be every 3/4 of a second? And the second is how are you going to, at the stations, you're saying the pods were airtight, but in the stations themselves, how are you going to keep the passengers and, let's say, the track separate from each other?
Well, I think I'll address the latter one first. The way you do this is by having a multi-platform station, and we will need about 80 platforms. But, you know, each pod will get guided into its platform. People can get out. There's a certain dwell time, the same as there is with any public transport network. That's definitely manageable. The first question regarding, you know, how you actually slow stuff down when the lead times are so short. Have you ever been on a log flume? Pretty much that. Big pool of sewage. You know, some guys there with poles kind of pushing the pods in the right direction. This is all very much achievable technology.
Yeah, happy, thank you.
Great.
Seems airtight.
Given the number of people we're talking about and the speed at which they'll be moving, how do you plan on handling blockages?
So I think the way you address this is by considering the tube itself. Firstly, we already have a blockage problem in London because of all the fatbergs, as I mentioned.
Yes, but there's not people moving through it.
So is your question what happens if one of the pods gets stuck?
Yes, essentially.
Right. So I think the lubrication helps with that, and the other part of that is the other major component in fatbergs is actually wet wipes. So we keep the inside of the sewers very clean because we've got these pods going through very, very quickly. And I think statistically the number of, the chance of blockages is relatively low. That said, the first action I would take, you know, if I have approval for this kind of thing, is to actually build a full-size demonstrator. So it's, you know, I'm very much a kind of big ideas, concept engineer. I'm not going to get into the detail just yet. Partly because the thought horrifies me.
So I wouldn't mind following up with a little detail, even though you don't like details. And that was one of the first statements that you made, that you said that engineers are interesting. Who told you that?
Allow me to grovel slightly. If I may offer a very small correction. Public transport gives engineers something interesting to talk about at parties. And so our default state is that we're very, very uninteresting people.
I'm not convinced, but...
Have you taken into account the fact that I think it's a fact that people tend to have one poo a day, and therefore the return journey may not have as much force behind it.
So that's a very astute observation. The volume in my calculations was based chiefly on the number of flushes per day per person. And the great thing is, once it gets into the sewers, you can basically just assume like a uniform density. And there is information out there about, you know, how dense sewage is, what the effect of different temperatures is on the viscosity and that kind of thing. We have tried where possible to take that into account. Yeah.
Well, that's answered all of that. Ed Bilson, everyone. Ed Bilson there with crass rail, as we're now calling it. Okay. How can 300 million litres of sewage be a rounding error? That's incredible. Anyway, so we're now going to go straight into our next speaker, who is Dr. Chavi Narayan, whose name I will say slightly differently every time. Chavi Narayan is a recovering neuroscientist. Oh, this should be fun. Who currently works in science communication. She did her undergraduate degree at the University of Delhi in India before moving to the University of Oxford for her master's, and then doctorate, followed by a long stint in science publishing. Can you please put your hands together for Dr. Chavi Narayan?
Can you please play the first slide?
Push it out. No. Push into your bum. Bring those legs right back. Good girl.
Thank you so much for stopping. So can I have the next slide, please? So giving birth is really, really hard. That's the percentage of women who have urinary incontinence after giving birth. That's the proportion of women who have some kind of perineal trauma after giving birth. And for non-specialists in the audience, what that means is that they have some kind of injury to their genitals. So humans are almost uniquely bad at giving birth. And there are two competing explanations for why this is so. So the first explanation is that this is essentially a side effect. It's a side effect of a bipedal posture, of having a large brain, and these have other sorts of evolutionary payoffs. But the other competing explanation, which is available to most people in the West, is that it is actually punishment. It's actually punishment from a vengeful God who really, really hates women. If maternity care is not good and things are really not going well, this explanation is actually the more convincing one. So my hypothesis is that bad maternity care directly predisposes belief in a vengeful creator God. And the ideal testing ground for this hypothesis is the United States of America. So the United States of America has wide variation in the quality of maternity care provided. It also has wide variation in creationist beliefs. And these two things are almost perfectly correlated. And once you sort of understand this fundamental mediating factor which is at play, there are all sorts of things which otherwise don't make sense, which suddenly start to make sense. So for example, in the United States of America, more women than men are creationists. Now this makes no sense at all because women are generally far more rational than men. So they're more likely to follow evidence-based healthy eating advice. They're better drivers. Far more men than women are likely to believe that the Earth is secretly ruled by a race of shape-shifting reptilian aliens. And every year, far more men than women are kidnapped by aliens. So this increased belief in creationism by women makes absolutely no sense unless you consider the mediating factor of poor maternal care. And in the UK as well, as soon as the NHS is introduced, there's this real leveling in the number of religious organizations. And once the sort of fundamental level of maternity care that is provided by the NHS really starts to bed in, you see this real increase in the number of secular organizations. So the US and the UK formed this really pair of contrasting studies of belief in a vengeful patriarchal God versus positive maternal experience. But in case you feel sort of very proud of yourself, it is not the case that the UK is a sort of best case scenario. So Finland, for example, has nearly half the number of maternal deaths that the UK does. And what's interesting is that Finland is experiencing a sort of neo-pagan revival. So they're really kind of moving away from Christianity into some really ancient matriarchal goddesses. So Finland's pattern of data is so aberrant that it actually doesn't fit into this graph. And when you consider Finland, you realize that belief in a vengeful patriarchal god can actually have a negative axis. And that's the only way you can make sense of this data. So we would advise caution in sort of further efforts to improve maternity care in the UK, because this might have wide-reaching social implications. It might result in the abolishment of the Church of England, a state religion, having bishops in the House of Lords, and it might result in the return of some really, really, really old British deities. So I will stop there, and I'm very happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Really interesting talk, and I'm convinced by the data. Also, have you looked into the fact, and I think this is true, that many discoverers of dinosaur fossils suffer really badly later in life from arthritis? And could this be in any way connected with the said vengeful god?
Thank you so much for that question. That is an avenue which we had not previously considered, I have to admit. But yes, kind of the belief in a vengeful creator god seems to have kind of far-reaching implications for all sorts of things. And maternal care might be just one of the factors that it's mediating, but possibly arthritis and dinosaur fossils. We'd certainly look into funding for that.
So your data speaks for itself.
Absolutely.
But I'm just wondering if there might be more sort of practical applications for this. So naturally, funding the NHS is always has borrowings. So would there be a cost-benefit to perhaps abolishing the Church of England as a cheaper way of improving maternal care than just pumping money into the NHS?
I see exactly where you're going. But I think in this case, there's been a sort of fundamental misunderstanding of our hypothesis. So the arrow of causation is the other way. So if NHS care gets even better than it is now, the Church of England will be abolished.
So it's not a two-way relationship, then? It's simply one.
It's worth testing. It's worth throwing some money at the NHS. I would certainly suggest throwing some money at the NHS and seeing what happens.
But perhaps just abolishing a small sect, just to see what the effect is.
It could be, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I have no questions. This fits really neatly into my worldview, so I'm just going to accept it.
It's not often I'm speechless.
I do have to admit, seeing Sheila in the gig in her full glory, which this is not the full glory, often has that effect on people. So Zach insisted that I put that little black bar there. I would urge people to see this, the uncensored version.
But I'm desperately trying to think of a reasonable question to ask. What kind of level of money are we talking about?
One of the problems of this hypothesis is that it is entirely correlational in nature. So that is one of its weaknesses. And the ideal thing would be to actually do a causational test in somewhere like the US. So for example, you take two states, something like Arkansas or Alabama, which have similar levels of kind of maternal outcomes, similar levels of creationist belief, and basically recreate the NHS in one of them, but not the other. and see what happens. And this is an expensive exercise, and it may be that there is a null result. There is no difference in levels of creationist belief. And what may happen is that a whole lot of women will have less urinary incontinence and less injury to the genitals for no good reason at all. But we do think that is a risk worth taking.
Do you know, I actually do have one question.
Yes.
With the state of the current government over in the US, are you at all concerned that findings like this could cause them to deliberately try to keep maternal deaths high?
So if
I feel like it needed to be asked.
We're running pretty low on time.
But just very quickly, yes. And I think the current US government has a deep appreciation for this hypothesis and is making practical use of it, exactly as you point out.
Wow. Thank you for ending on the outlandish suggestion of providing health care in the US. So, it's still behind me, isn't it? It's unbelievable. It's going to be some really hard to explain Twitter photos later. Our next speaker is Ed Thorne. Ed is a writer and improviser from London. His outstanding scientific credentials are compromised only by being entirely fictional. We have got to stop letting them write their own descriptions and improvising their own descriptions. So I know, you've made that very clear, Zach. So far, his main contribution to science has been staying out of science, for which scientists are very grateful. Put your hands together for Ed Thorne.
So, most of the matter in the universe is missing. When we go and look up through our telescopes, we only see about 11% of the matter we expect to see there. The rest is what we call dark matter. But we're never really looking at space. It's really difficult to make big lenses, so modern optical telescopes tend to use big mirrors instead. So it's not really accurate to say that most of the universe isn't visible. It's more accurate to say that most of the universe doesn't have a reflection in the mirror. Yeah, so the implication is somewhat obvious. Dark matter is primarily composed of vampires. I know hindsight is a hell of a thing. So meet the WIMP, or weakly interacting massive particle. We're proposing a specific kind of WIMP that we're calling a vampirically attractive massive particle, or VAMP. So vampires are a great candidate for WIMPs as a kind of dark matter for a couple of reasons. So firstly, WIMPs are typically expected to be slow-moving, also known as cold dark matter, which is consistent with the cold, cold blood of undeath. And secondly, and perhaps more convincingly, WIMPs are typically expected to be much larger than most particles, and vampires are much larger than most particles. Okay, so why don't vampires have a reflection in the mirror anyway? Because it's kind of weird, because photons don't really care if they're hitting an eye or hitting a mirror. It shouldn't make a difference. So the only way this really makes sense is if vampires just don't interact electromagnetically at all, which is actually consistent with our observations, because if you think about it, we don't see vampires out of the mirror either. So, the thing is, there must be some kind of force that vampires can use to interact with the world, and we have a kind of hint as to what this might be. See, vampires are typically either highly attractive or deeply repulsive. sometimes having a sort of magnetic quality to them. And this lends credence to the already proposed hypothesis of dark electromagnetism, which, as it sounds, is literally just an analog for electromagnetism that works with dark charge on dark matter. Okay, so my research team was really interested when we came across this, because then we thought, well, okay, if there's going to be dark electromagnetism, maybe there's also, say, a dark Higgs. And what if the dark Higgs is much stronger than the light Higgs? Could that explain the mass discrepancy between dark matter and light matter? Unfortunately, that turns out to be kind of a dead end, because the Higgs only provides about 1% of baryonic matter's mass. So actually, the dark Higgs would have to be about 500 times stronger than the light Higgs to account for the discrepancy. Now 500 is a huge number. We don't usually see numbers anything like this big in physics, which really suggests that we're barking up the wrong tree here. So it seems more likely that dark matter just has the same kind of density as light matter, which allows us to go and estimate the number of vampires out there by taking the total mass of dark matter and dividing by the average mass of a human, and we get about 10 to the 52 vampires. Seems like a reasonable estimate. So given that there are so many vampires and there's so much dark matter out there, why are we failing to detect it? Well, we think that the experimental methodology that's currently used is flawed. So a common way that scientists go and look for dark matter is through trying to catch it in direct detection traps, which vampires just don't go in. While others are indirectly looking for dark matter by watching for particles that scatter off it as it re-enters our atmosphere. But vampires rarely leave our atmosphere in the first place. So we're proposing a new line of research that uses the vamp model to inform its decisions. So we're going to look at the most common vampiric interaction, which is a vampire turning into a bat. So this starts off with your standard vamp-anti-vamp annihilation, producing a dark photon, which then does something called kinetic mixing to turn itself into a photon. So kinetic mixing is this mechanism that allows a dark photon to become a light photon through a mechanism that is so trivially simple that I won't bore you with the details here. And then the light photon itself goes and decays into regular matter, particle-antiparticle pair. And through an as of yet not understood biological mechanism, all these end products are going to aggregate to finally produce a bat-anti-bat pair. And the excess mass from the vampire is expelled as a cloud of smoke to disguise the transformation. And this lost mass actually goes and explains why vampires can turn into bats, but we never see bats turning into vampires. And this broken vampire-to-bat symmetry suggests that we need to go and take the existing idea of conservation of CPT, like charge, parity, and time. You take that paradigm and add bats as well. So charge, parity, time, and also bats conservation. My research team and I, we understand that a lot of this is going to possibly rankle some in the scientific establishment. There's a lot of entrenched views on dark matter. But actually, we found there's a lot of scientific organizations out there who are very receptive to this sort of thing, which you can prove for yourself just by searching for bat conservation.
Well, it is consistent with all observations of dark matter. Do you have a plan for detecting the vamp? I mean, how do you plan to take your research forwards?
All right, okay. So the idea is we've made quite a testable prediction there, which is conservation of bats necessarily implies you get bat-anti-bat pair production. So if there really are vampires out there, we should expect to be seeing very large numbers of anti-bats. So, I mean, that's testable right there. We don't really yet have a kind of concrete experimental plan. We're more of the theory side of... Yeah. So one thing you could do is you could go into the biggest kind of bat colonies. Some of them are like upwards of tens of millions of bats. It's crazy. And you could just try chucking matter at them and seeing if any of them explode. But like you try getting the grant money for that. It's
Have you considered the possibility that it may be that scientists will need to be virgins to be able to detect?
Yeah, so we did actually go and look into what we thought might be some of the ideal lab conditions for, because you can probably modify the direct detection traps to actually encourage vampires to go into them, right? So we looked at things like modifying cafeteria schedules so there's no garlic bread on the menu. Making the scientists' lives more stressful so that they have higher blood pressure. But yeah, like the virgin thing as well. I'm not sure it's always a huge problem with scientists, but speaking from personal experience, it's just.
I have a few questions, just a few. I'm a little iffy on where are these? Are they on Earth? Are they in space?
Oh, okay. So
I mean, we're all in space, but you.
So 10 to the 52 is a very big number, and you wouldn't be able to fit them all on Earth. But it turns out space is really big. So
I have heard that.
Okay, so I am an expert. Oh God. I'm an expert on dark matter and can confidently assert that dark matter is basically just smeared out everywhere. It's everywhere, inside every mote of sunlight, inside every laughter of child, inside every nebula.
So there are just vampires everywhere.
Yeah, just
smeared across all of space.
Yeah. So it's kind of really quite scary if you think about it. It really makes you appreciate how small you are, right?
So I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I'd just like to confirm that scientists are eternally grateful that you don't do this as a job anymore.
I mean, there's no coming back from that. Ed Thorne, everyone! It's the kind of show where the head of physics has to take that seriously. And quote of the night so far is, well, I'm no expert. Oh God, I am the expert. Brilliant. So up next is Diego Quinones, who is a physicist from Mexico, interested in everything with quantum in its title. Open bracket, except maybe quantum detergent. Close bracket. Diego came to the UK to do his PhD at the University of Leeds and is now a postdoc at the University of Brighton. He thinks science is awesome and tries to share his passion about physics through outreach and public engagement. Can you please put your hands together for Diego Quinones?
Thank you. I would like to start my talk with a question. Why did the Scarecrow win an award? The answer? Oh, thank you. Well, I can see that here we have an example of what we call a dad, with this being an example of a dad joke. Also, if you laugh at it and you think you're not a dad, you might want to have a look at that. So, dad jokes are usually poorly received by other family members. And in some cases, they can even have bad consequences. So one should raise the question, why do fathers keep telling them? My hypothesis is that they are a behavior fathers develop to encourage nest living. So allow me to explain. In nature, the brood leaves the parent's company at a certain age to reduce the probability of predation, find their own resource, or look for potential mates. But humans, having no natural predators, all resources are at the reach of their hands, and all basic needs covered, have little motivation to do so. Here is where dad jokes plays a key role. This is the typical level of enjoyment of a dad joke for a person as a function of the age. You can see there is a sudden drop around the age of 12, which is the age when kids become teenagers. It is a well-known fact that teenagers are short-tempered. If a dad tells a joke to a teenager, the later will become visibly upset, even describing physical discomfort by calling the situation to be painful. Therefore, it will be sensible for dads to stop telling jokes to avoid any confrontation. But what we observe is quite the opposite. The more annoyed or embarrassed the teen becomes as a result of the joke, the more likely is that the dad would tell a joke. The only logical explanation is that dads are using this joke to motivate their children to avoid any interaction between them. Also, notice there is some probability of a dad telling a joke, even if the potential for annoyance is 0. I call this level the vacuum dad joke, which might be an indication of a quantum joke dynamics. Anyway, probably by now you are already convinced by my argument, but I would like to present more concrete evidence. First, I tried to conduct a survey asking people about the amount and quality of the dad jokes of their fathers to see if it was related with the nest living. Sadly, this was proven futile because no matter who I asked, the only answer I could get was all the time and just often. So instead, I decided to analyze patterns of nest living around the world. Here is the average age of nest living for different European countries. If now we look at the weather in these regions, we can notice that people in colder weathers would tend to leave the nest at a younger age. So why is this, you might ask? Well, what happens when the weather is cold? We tend to stay indoors. Longer indoor periods mean more opportunity for dad-child interaction, therefore increasing the exposure to dad jokes. Proving without a doubt that the main reason for a person to become independent is to avoid the dad jokes. I would like to finish just by discussing the potential impact of this discovery. Recently, there has been an increase in the number of young adults living with their parents. This is not due to shortage of affordable housing or lack of financial responsibility by the millennials, as some people suggest, but clearly because of a lack of exposure to dad jokes. Today's levels are the highest in the 1940s, at the end of the Great Depression, and back then that had little reason to joke around. So, the solution is obvious. We need to increase the exposure of young people to dad jokes. In the UK, a dad spends an average of 1.5 to 2 hours a day with the children. To ensure enough dad jokes, we will need to at least quadruplicate this time, which might be an impossible task. So instead, we will need to use public funding to display that joke in crowded areas. This might still not be enough. So we will need to think about how to incorporate dad jokes into the youngsters' daily activities. So what is the one thing young people do all the time? No, I'm talking about looking at screens. Combining this with the state-of-the-art dad joke software, we could create an artificial intelligence capable of delivering dad jokes directly to teenagers into healthy daily amounts. This, of course, will require a lot of time and money investment. So while we secure the funding, each of us will need to do our own part. Because of this, I would like to leave you with this list of dad jokes for you to use as much as possible. Thank you.
So as a new father myself, I have a four-month daughter, I have noticed a desire to start telling terrible puns. So this does tally with my own personal experience. What sort of rate should I start telling jokes at in order to get her to leave home before she's 20?
So it will depend on how often I do that joke. So if you want to encourage like 10 years, maybe you want to start right now, telling as much as possible.
Excellent, thank you.
I mean, obviously, some dads tell really good jokes.
I beg to differ, but...
I mean, for instance, the joke, why did the cat build the rocket? Because it wanted to go to the moon. Is...
Point proven.
So this seems like a fairly risky parenting strategy. Is there not some risk of alienating the spouse with all these annoying jokes?
Well, that might be an unfortunately secondary function, but yeah, there is little we can do about it. So.
I also, on your graph charting the ages at which we find dad jokes funny, I noticed that it happens quite young. You know, we start to get annoyed with these jokes at a very young age, sort of 11, 12-ish. It's obviously far too young to leave the nest. And I also wonder if maybe mothers are a little bit keener to keep their kids around for longer. Do you think that could cause any conflict between the mated pair? You know, the dad's trying to kind of shove them out and the mum's not?
Well, you can always tell that when a dad is telling a joke, nobody is enjoying, so there is some strain between.
Yeah.
I actually have a question for one of my panel members. I don't get your joke.
Just when we thought last time was the best burn.
Sometimes, you know, it's all in the telling of it. And if you mistake the word cat for cow, which sometimes happens, then...
Oh, I'm sorry, I feel so foolish.
Well, now it's just become a workshop on the joke. Diego Quinones. Stick to the homonyms, mate. Okay. So, up next, are there 7 contestants? I said 6. Rounding error. To the nearest order of magnitude, we have 10 contestants tonight. And the number N of them is Louis Terrell. And Louis is studying for a physics degree. Don't applaud effort, applaud results. Studying for a physics degree here at Imperial, home crowd, nice job, in the hopes of legitimizing his plans for world optimization. He wants to use big science to solve social issues, or at least replace them with more interesting problems. Can you put your hands together for Louis Terrell?
Good evening. If you look carefully at the question mark on this side, you'll see a pale blue dot. That's here. That's us. Everything you've ever known and loved, it's all been suspended on this mote of dust in a sunbeam. I've got to change slides. That's the pale blue dot. You know what I said. My talk is on the overview effect, which is a cognitive shift in awareness that comes from viewing the Earth from space during spaceflight. In other words, seeing the Earth changes your mind. Now, on the face of it, this is horrifying. It's an image so profound that it alters the way you think. And not only that, like a virus, it makes you want to spread it further. However, unlike previous years, I'm not proposing we cut the Earth off from space forever. No. The reason for this is that despite being a horrifying mind virus, the overview effect actually has largely positive effects, such as an increased life satisfaction and a greater sense of empathy and altruism. Of course, with an experience this profound and transcendent, there's no way we can quantify the benefits of it. Or can we? We can break down the individual components of its effects and look at how much people are willing to spend for each of those. So, for example, the life satisfaction you gain from doubling your income, how much politicians are willing to spend to buy your vote, the amount of social engagement that is bought by going to charity shops and working a minimum wage, and the amount tourists are willing to spend to be smug for the rest of their lives. And then we can subtract the cost of going to space and find that this is clearly a fantastic opportunity for social benefit. The trouble is, it's quite expensive up front, and these benefits will pay out over the course of entire lifetimes, which means rather than within a 4-year timescale, so funding might be a bit of a challenge. So we need to make this cheaper. How can we do that? Well, one option is to put up posters of the view from space absolutely everywhere. Just plaster the walls with them. Unfortunately, we've had these pictures around for almost half a century, and during that time we failed to abolish nuclear weapons, carbon emissions, or overpriced graduation gowns. Clearly, the Earthrise photo is overrated. As a test, I've had a picture of the Earth from space up for the entirety of this talk. Raise your hand if you've suddenly been overwhelmed with generosity and feelings of altruism towards your fellow man. That's more than I expected. Well, you can put that newfound generosity to good use. That's a link to my GoFundMe. So perhaps we can make this experience more immersive than just posters. For example, using bungee jumps to simulate the feeling of freefall and VR headsets showing the view from space. The trouble with this approach is that each individual experience of freefall and VR only lasts for a couple of seconds. So we may need to repeat this tens or even hundreds of times per participant until they self-report a feeling of transcendent joy. So this might not be a viable approach. Perhaps the fact is that we need to see the Earth hanging there in the sky to fully appreciate it. And there are a couple of ways we've accomplished this, for example, with balloons painted to look like the Earth. Now, you might say this seems implausible. However, humans regularly mistake weather balloons for literally anything, from other planets to flying saucers. So imagine how much more deceptive it could be if we actually designed them for that purpose. Alternatively, we could paint the moon. This is self-explanatory, so I'm not going to linger on it. But the last approach, which I think is the strongest so far, is to place a giant mirror in space to reflect the Earth, and so that provides a constant, real-time, up-to-date view of what's going on. After all, in your bathroom, do you have a full-length portrait of yourself? No, you use a mirror, so you can get a real-time look at exactly what's going on here, which is often necessary. Now, at this point in the talk, some of you may be thinking, this seems suspiciously like a scheme I've cooked up to place a giant death ray in orbit that I can then use to take over the world. Unfortunately, I've run the numbers, and it's just not a viable tool for planetary destruction. And also, all these approaches have the disadvantage that, should the fake Earth be destroyed, the global trauma that would cause might outweigh all the benefits from the overview effect. So, and not only that, but unfortunately, everyone who has experienced the overview effect insists that we really do need to go into space to properly experience it. So we can't get around it with posters or VR or giant floating weather balloons. So how can we get people into space more cheaply? There are the usual approaches, such as space elevators, launch loops, laser propulsion, or space fountains, which are so speculative that this is the best concept art I can find of them. However, our key issue here is that humans are really heavy. we could get around this by sending humans up at a point in their life cycle where they weigh less. Babies are significantly lighter than adult humans. I have citations, but I wasn't able to fit a bibliography slide in. But the trouble is, infantile amnesia means that even if the babies do go to space and appreciate the experience, they will immediately forget about it, which would nullify all our benefits. And as for sending up older kids, well, as any parent will know, good luck getting them to appreciate anything. So younger astronauts aren't really an option. What about partial astronauts? Do you really need the entirety of your body attached to experience the overview effect? No. In fact, we can quantify the amount you're able to experience the overview effect with an overview effect factor and look at how that varies as the percentage of body mass removed increases. And as you remove more body mass, you can send more astronauts up on the same budget. We reach optimal efficiency by removing 90% of a body, leaving just 5 kilograms of head left. Now, at this point, you may again question the feasibility of my approach. However, human head transplants are already a viable possibility in the field of medicine. It's actively being discussed. It could happen within years. The only thing I'm proposing is an intermediate stage between detaching the head and reattaching it. This would have the advantage of lowering our transport costs per capita by an order of magnitude, because you are only sending the capita. And in addition to, well, yes, when you're going to space, every kilogram counts, and that's why we use rocket staging, and why this is a natural extension of that principle. You don't want to carry up discarded fuel stages that aren't doing anything useful for you, and your body below the neck isn't really doing much to benefit you either. Of course, this has implications beyond making the overview effect accessible to everyone and revolutionizing human society. At the moment, in the International Space Station, we have 3 astronauts. Imagine how much more science we could perform if we replaced them with 30 astronaut heads instead. Thank you for listening.
So I think it's a spectacular idea.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
The only concern I have is how do you reattach the head afterwards?
Oh, that's just part of the medical procedure.
Yeah, okay, so how many heads do you anticipate needing to send to space in order for the overview effect to become widespread enough to affect social change?
Well, one way to achieve it would be to start with the heads of state, if you will.
Makes sense, yeah.
And work from the top down.
Will you be taking volunteers, or how is this going to work? Is there going to be a selection process?
Well, we could have something similar to Kickstarter, maybe have people be able to petition and provide funding for their head of state to go off into space. And that seems like an economical approach.
I'm interested in the mirror idea,
Mm-hmm.
and I wondered if have you been already carrying out some experiments in this area, and has that got anything to do with the cheetahs and the savannah?
So with regards to the mirror, I don't need to carry out any experiments because I'm a physicist. I can just do the calculations instead. The engineers can deal with the rest of that. However, on the topic of mirror, I do have to mention the bullet with butterfly wings hypothesis that the world is a vampire, since it came up in a previous talk, as if that does prove to be the case, that would make the mirror completely useless.
So your quote from Edgar Mitchell about grabbing a politician by the scruff of the neck, look at this.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying that for spaceflight, most of the body below the neck is just not used. How are you going to counter the fact that at the moment, most politicians don't seem to be using their bodies from the neck up?
Well, one point I didn't get to mention was that while these heads are in space, they're not going to be attached for bodies, which means that we will need to pump them full of adrenaline and possibly other drugs to make them conscious enough to experience the overview effect. So hopefully that would also help kickstart the processes if they weren't doing anything back on Earth as well.
Louis Terrell.
Thank you very much.
I mean, I'm prepared to call that the best per capita joke of the evening. I don't want to, who knows, Catherine, we'll see. All right, so your final speaker, number 7 of 6, Catherine Reed, is a medical student at Imperial College, London. She strongly believes in the importance of pushing the limits of scientific knowledge and is proud to say that her theories remain, as ever, unhindered by such trivial restrictions as accuracy. Please put your hands together for Catherine Reed.
Good evening. The evolution of man is as good as defined by our transition from 4 legs to 2. This was pretty much a terrible idea. It makes us more unstable, but with further to fall, and it directs pressure through our bodies in ways we just aren't adapted to handle, causing back problems, unstable joints, and a frankly unnecessary degree of pain every time we tread on a Lego. The best-known theory of bipedalism at the moment comes from Darwin, who said that we needed our hands free to use tools. But this can't be the only explanation for the origin of bipedalism. Fossil records show us that we didn't start to use tools until at least 1.1 million years after we began to walk on 2 feet. Instead, we must look for clues from the rest of the animal kingdom. Although there aren't many other genuine bipeds, we see frequent acts of spontaneous bipedalism in a variety of other mammals. These incidents occur almost invariably in moments of intense terror. Fleeting bipedalism seems to be the first preparation that the animal makes to flee. This is actually not a big surprise. Pulling yourself upright forces the body to work harder against gravity and the increase in exposed surface area. It raises our heart rate and our blood pressure. This is exactly what you see when you get a big kick of adrenaline. But to be forced to stand upright all the time, humans must have been subject to some pretty persistent anxiety. With that kind of level of stress, it's no wonder our hair fell out as well. So what happened to induce this constant state of fear in our ancestors? Socializing. The thing that really sets humans apart from other animals is our sense of self-consciousness. We are the only species capable of blushing, or of recognizing ourselves in a mirror only to brood agonizingly over what we just saw there. Being social animals is an intrinsically stressful activity, with an ever-present danger of crushed egos, isolation, and embarrassment. As humans, we're made to constantly interact with a variety of bosses, co-workers, family, extended family, friends, casual acquaintances, potential love interests, and seemingly endless others. We were driven into a perpetual state of panic, to which running around on 2 legs all the time was an adaptive response. Let's examine the evidence behind this theory. First, we know that early hominids were not actually fully bipedal. We seem to have risen more completely onto 2 legs as we've become more cognitively aware. Increasing intelligence would only have made us more acutely conscious of our own social failings, deepening our intense insecurity as we became more capable of mentally simulating why some other caveman might be mad at us. Was it something I said? Is this about the time I mistook a Homo neanderthalensis for a Homo deniscifer? That was a weird night. Okay, so the only early humans who would have survived the increasingly cutthroat world of social pitfalls were those with the baseline adaptations to keep themselves in a state of hyper-awareness, with their hearts pumping, adrenaline flowing, and stress responses switched on. Another unusual human feature is our propensity for endurance running. This is clearly not designed to allow us to get a long way from predators, over a short distance even, or to hunt fast animals. What it does do is allow you to get a really long way away from that stranger you just waved at because you totally failed to realize they were actually greeting their friend who's right behind you. This also explains the dopamine rush we get after prolonged exercise. It's the brain's reward system telling you that you did a great job getting away from another tricky social interaction. We can also see some evidence in the way we carry out our social interactions now. When we meet someone new, we often stand up to greet them. This is preparation to run. Meanwhile, babies happily spend all their time crawling or lying around just like any other quadruped, right up until they're driven to learn to stand around the time they start understanding human speech. By the time we're adults, we only really manage to get in a solid, uninterrupted 8 or so hours of lying down if we're totally isolated from social interaction, when we're asleep. Most of our other leisure activities, when we do manage to relax, also involve sitting or lying down, or drinking alcohol. We all know that alcohol affects our balance. It's generally believed that this is due to actions on the cerebellum. But now it seems more likely that once our social inhibitions are lowered, there's simply no need for the body to devote energy to staying upright. Finally, we can now explain a recent and otherwise incomprehensible phenomenon. Lately, employers have been pushing the idea of the standing desk. This may well be a means to assert social dominance. Yeah, your colleague with the new desk gets praised for their fitness, but more crucially, they're going to be the only one hyped up enough to finally send Tony from accounting that passive-aggressive email he deserves. So now that we've accepted that fear is inherent to bipedalism, what does it mean for us now? Recently, we've seen a huge increase in social anxiety. We've struggled to find a reliable source of blame. Parenting failures, social upheaval, the internet. But now that we know the truth about bipedalism, we have another target to explore. Fitness movements have been increasing in prevalence. To our bodies, this just feels like, I need to get away from another difficult conversation. Exercise is psychologically damaging. It is time, finally, that we stop going for jogs and embrace sitting, lying around, and generally lying flat on our faces on the floor. Thank you.
So what you're telling me then is that there are clear, tangible health benefits to getting legless.
I think it could definitely have some psychologically beneficial aspects and potentially physical as well, if we assume, you know, we really shouldn't be standing on 2 legs all the time. This is a really bad idea.
I really enjoyed your hypothesis.
Thank you.
Obviously, anthropologically speaking, there are different cultures all around the world that experience different levels of stress because of different levels of things and everything like that. So it stands to reason that different cultures experience different levels of social anxiety. Mm-hmm. So if this is correct, wouldn't that also suggest that the more social anxiety a society experiences, the better their posture would be? And also the better their cardiovascular fitness would be?
I think this is definitely a good area for more exploration, yes.
Okay.
This is what I have to
I like your use of the cat example. Are there any other examples of cat videos that are pertinent to this research?
I think if there aren't, then it's something that we absolutely need to change.
I mean, have you seen what they do when they see a cucumber?
If I can just follow up with one of my panel members, seeing cat videos does not help your cat jokes at all.
You're kind of vicious. I love it.
I think we're done. You may leave, Catherine Reid. Next year, the show will be hosted by Michele Dougherty. That's it. That's all 7 speakers. A massive round of applause for all 7 of them. Well done. So Zach is now keeping an eye on the judges to make sure they're doing what they're meant to be, ranking everyone from their favourite who gets 3 points down to their third favourite who gets 1. We are now going to do the audience vote. And to do everyone who's running around, by the way, are the volunteers who are meant to be running around. Don't panic. To do this, I'm going to remind you of the people you saw, and we're going to do it in the order you saw them. So the fact that you may forget earlier people is compensated by that you'll probably be more enthusiastic about applauding at the beginning. Well, hopefully that will all compensate. So don't applaud yet, just to remind you of the 7 people you saw. We started with Jack McMinn, that was the first one, yes, who had cheetahs exploding in fireballs. That explains just everything, I guess. Ed Bilson then talked about the poo-based train. You learn a lot about how much attention I was paying by my summaries. Chavi Narain then showed us birth versus a vengeful god. We had Ed Thorne with the vamp matter. We had Diego Quinones with dad jokes to facilitate nest leaving. We had Louis Terrell with the overview effect of being in space. And finally we had Catherine Reid with social pain leading to an upright standing position. Is everyone adequately happy with their summary? Excellent. Okay, so we're going to do that again. I'm going to have the decibel meter, and Zach is going to note them down. So, let me get this up. So what I'll do is, I'll say the name, I'll recalibrate this so it's fair, I'll do the board, and that's when you applaud for that specific person. So, up first, reset, okay. So up first, Jack McMinn with the cheetah fireball. Once you've peaked, we don't care about any local maxima. Okay. Reset, that joke's just for me. Ed Bilson with the poo train. Chavi Narain with birth versus an angry god. We should do a spectral analysis next time. Definitely. Anyway, the answer to all of life's problems are Fourier-based. Okay, up next, Ed Thorne with Vampire Dark Matter. Diego Quinones with Dad Jokes and Nest Leaving. Two to go, so just make sure you're not, tapering off too much there to invalidate our results, because they're so scientific so far. Next, Louis Terrell with the overview effect from space. late peak on that one. Any plot fans? There you are. And finally, we had at the very end, Catherine Reed with Social Pain to Upright Posture. That's incredible. But if you've been coming to all of these, this is the fourth one, and I was hosting the first time. So it's been 3 years, which is correct for 4 of them. Fence post people, pay attention. I've been using the same app every time. I've only just realized if I go sideways, I get a better display of, wow, man, next year this is going to go off. Okay, so we have all of those. Are you going to go add up some results?
I've done it.
You've already got the results?
Yeah, I pointed to my head, but I did it on paper.
Do we need to say what the prizes are? How do you want to do this? Normally I've got to fill a lot of time here. I'll tell you what, let's do, I'll say what the prizes are, and then we'll announce do you want to do the graph winner first? Sure. Why not? You really don't have any real picture for, brilliant. Well, after my quick 20-minute routine, we're going to go straight, so we'll do the Lloyd James Award for charts, plots, and/or figures, and the person gets to come up, and I'm regretting this already, do a short acceptance speech.
Okay, I'm delighted to announce that the winner of the Lloyd James Prize for Best Use of Graphs, Charts, and/or Figures is Jack McMinn.
Thank you for allowing me to humiliate myself in public twice now, both with this and with me just winging this. Cool.
Jack McMinn! Who won because he was the only person who got the name of the award right. So we're now set for the grand. Do you want to do it? Do you want to do it from the lectern? That feels. I mean, given I get to make the rules up, it turns out.
So let me just say, it was actually down to the completely unscientific decibel meter between 3 people, but by a hair, it was Ed Thorne. Ed, I think, is the only one to have ever won twice now.
When I was a boy, I dreamed of winning this award, and that's what's happened, so...
This is a sack of books.
It's a sack of books. That's my favorite format of book, so...
The winner receives, as well as brand Boiling Urine, a sack of books from our great friends at Penguin Books. Fun fact, Zach and I are published by exactly the same imprint, and a cash prize.
Yeah, I thought you were going to skip it.
Which was I know, because I'm holding the cash prize. Which was originally specified in US dollars, and has been worth less and less as the date got closer and closer. So 300 British pounds, as well as the books, which can you put a price on learning? And a 3D printed multi-format trophy. A final round of applause for Ed Thorne. I mean, we do some thanks and we wrap this thing up, right? That's pretty much it.
Whatever we want.
Oh, I know. Brilliant. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we have a few thanks, of course, and I'll explain what's happening directly after this because the fun and excitement can and indeed will continue. They're volunteers. Don't panic. So, the thank yous that I am obliged to read out. First of all, Imperial College. Thank you very much, Imperial College. That's where we are right now. Specifically, a strict subset of Imperial College, the Royal College Science Union, who were heavily involved in putting this together for the Science Union. Nice. Now again, Lloyd, you sat down again. Lloyd James has been heavily involved once again, putting it to makes it all happen. So Kelly was looking after the offspring. Which meant your parents didn't have to do it this time, or are they? Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Are they also helping with kids or not? No, they get nothing. That's fine. So Kelly Wiener-Smith, who stayed back in the States and also has, it looks like this runs seamlessly, and you're like, man, that Zach guy really organized this stuff. She's a doctor? Well, I'm married to a professor, so let's not start that game. Some people work long and hard for their academic credentials. We just marry into them. It's brilliant. So big round of applause for Dr. Kelly Wiener-Smith. These are the most combative thank yous I've ever had to read. A name with no context. What did Michael Johnson do? Michael Johnson! Wow! Thanks, Mike. All the volunteers who've run the show and have left, let's applaud them anyway, even though they've gone. The man who put himself on the list, Zach Wiener-Smith. Yeah, but skipping ahead, not me, Zach. I'm not on here. Particular books for providing the gift bags, which are given to the keynote speaker, the judges, the host, and the winner. So round of applause for particular books. An imprint of Penguin, Random House. I haven't even checked what books are in there yet. Mark Abrams for working with us to bring the Ig Nobles, which were on earlier this afternoon, together with BAHFest for a day of science-themed hilarity. To Mark and the Ig Nobles. And finally, for of course all the participants who put a huge amount of work into honing their talks, coming along, delivering it. It takes an incredible amount of effort, and this wouldn't happen without them. I say this genuinely, this evening is more entertaining than it has any right to be. Right? So a huge round of applause for the participants. Well, this has been great. So books will be on sale. They'll be sold from the base of the stairs. So as you go out, there are stairs down into the foyer. No, has that changed? Minor change. Books are on sale outside this room. Book signing is also outside this room. So everything is outside the room. We don't get to go to the bar this time. The bar is open. The bar is open. Health and safety. We can't. What? The bar didn't want books. A bar literally called H-Bar, ha ha ha. Oh my goodness. So the books will be for sale as soon as you go out. I think Tim will be signing books, I'm signing books. Mark, did you bring books? No one? Have you got books, Mark? You're not bothering. Yeah, maybe. Okay. We'll be signing books. We'll be around, is what I'm trying to say. Come and say, you don't have to buy a book to say hello. So if you just want to come up and say hi, we'll take a selfie, we'll sign your calculators, it's going to happen. That's absolutely fine, right? But if you want to buy a book, we will also deface that. I'll deface anyone's book, it's absolutely fine. So I think we're good. Is Tim poised for a reason, or we're... Tim's poised because he's going to get trained, so he's not signing books. Oh, you're not signing books? Boo. Oh, that's true. We're finishing a non-trivial amount over. So someone who lives in Oxford is going to race off for a train. Those of you who do appreciate their fans, we will be there signing books. On that point, I think we are done. Thank you so much for coming along. I've been Matt Parker. It's been BAHFest 2019 London. Thank you for watching. Thank you to our judges. We're out of here.